Caleb Valerius bought a crumbling shack to bury his pain and be forgotten by the world. But when he opened the door, the silence he had been searching for was shattered by the cries of two babies. In the shadows, he found the last thing he expected. A young woman with emerald skin and a beauty that stopped rational thought cold, exhausted, but with a blade in her hand, willing to fight to her last breath for her children. He was looking for isolation. She was looking for a miracle. Caleb only wanted peace, but this encounter would change both their lives forever. Caleb wanted peace, but Ilara's past refuses to be left behind. And it is already closer than either of them knows. What will become of Caleb, Ilara, and the twins? To know that we have to go back and understand how we got here. The grave was still fresh when Caleb Valerius walked away from it. He didn't look back. He had promised himself that much, one last act of will in a life that had been slowly stripped of everything worth holding. The dirt on his boots was dark and wet. The sky above the village of Harrowfield was the color of ash. And somewhere behind him, a wooden marker sat in the mud with Maeva's name carved into it by hands that had stopped shaking long enough to finish the job. He was 28 years old and already felt like a ruin. The village moved around him as he walked through the market square. Wheels on cobblestone, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, a child laughing somewhere behind a fence. Every sound landed on him like a stone thrown at a bruise. He had lived among these people his whole life. He had buried his wife among them 3 days ago, and now their faces, full of the usual pity, the careful distance, the half-formed words people offer the recently bereaved, were more than he could carry. He ducked into the notary's office before anyone could stop him to speak. The man behind the desk looked up from a ledger, adjusted his spectacles, and said nothing when Caleb placed the deed on the table. His father's land, 40 acres of good soil along the creek, the old barn, the oak grove his grandfather had planted, 3 generations of Valerius blood in every fence post. "You're sure?" the notary said. It wasn't quite a question. "Write the number." The man wrote it. The coins were counted out in gold and silver, heavy in Caleb's leather satchel. He signed without reading what he was signing. There was nothing left in him to care about the fine print. Outside, the sun had climbed just enough to make the village look almost cheerful. It felt like an insult. He had heard about the place from an old trapper who drank at the edge of respectable company. A shack out past the iron frontier, close to the canyon country where the green ridge dissolved into scrubland and wind. Nobody wanted it. Nobody had been out there in years. The trapper had described it the way men described graves, matter-of-factly, with no sentiment attached. That was exactly what Caleb wanted. He loaded his horse with what little he was keeping. The rifle his father had carried during the Great War, a bedroll, a cast-iron pan, 3 weeks of dried food, and a small tin box he didn't open. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He rode out through the south gate before noon. The village shrank behind him. The road became a track. The track became a suggestion in the grass. By evening, the iron frontier markers appeared. Stone pillars carved with old war symbols, half swallowed by the earth. Beyond them, the land changed. It went quieter, the sky felt wider, the wind had a different sound out here, lower and without echo. He made camp that first night beside a dry creek bed, under a sky so full of stars it almost looked like something worth looking at. Almost. He ate cold. He didn't build a fire. He lay on his back and stared upward and let the silence do what silence is supposed to do, which is nothing, just nothing. That was what he needed, to stop hearing her name in every ordinary sound, to stop turning around in a room expecting to see her there. He slept badly. He rode on in the morning. By midday of the second day, the shack appeared on a low rise above a dead field. It was worse than the trapper had described. One wall had partially collapsed inward. The roof was a patchwork of rotted timber and old hide. The door hung from a single iron hinge, creaking slowly in the wind. Weeds had come up through the floorboards on what was left of the porch. Caleb sat on his horse for a long moment, looking at it. Good, he thought. It looks exactly like I feel. He dismounted, tied the horse to the porch post, and walked up the 2 steps. The hinge groaned, the door swung open into shadow. He heard it immediately. Crying, 2 voices, both small, both urgent, layered over each other in that way only newborns cry, without strategy, without pretense, with nothing but pure need driving the sound. He froze in the doorway. Movement in the far corner, a shape unfolding from the darkness, and then, in the grey light filtering through the broken roof, he saw her. Green skin dark as a river stone, hair matted with dust and dried blood, eyes catching the light like something cornered and dangerous. She was young, she was beautiful in a way that stopped rational thought cold, and she had a bronze knife levelled at his chest with a hand that did not shake at all. Between her arms, wrapped in a torn cloak, 2 infants. She didn't speak first, neither did he. For 5 full seconds, the only sounds were the wind through the broken roof and the crying of the twins. And something in that combination, the raw need of those 2 small voices, cut through whatever Caleb had meant to do next. He lowered the rifle, slowly, both hands visible. He kept his eyes on hers. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. Her jaw tightened. The knife didn't move. "I bought this place," he said, 2 days ago. "I have the deed in my coat." She said nothing, but something behind her eyes shifted, a calculation, not a retreat. He took 1 careful step back onto the porch, giving her the whole doorway. "I'll wait out here," he said, "until you're ready to talk." He sat on the porch step. He pulled out his tin cup and the canteen. He poured water and waited. The twins kept crying. He heard her moving inside. Soft sounds, careful sounds, the quiet negotiation of a woman managing 2 infants and a desperate situation at the same time. After a few minutes, one of the babies quieted. Then the other. Then her voice came through the broken door. Low, careful, in the common tongue with an accent that carried something older in it. "How many are with you?" "No one," he said. Silence. "You came alone to a ruin past the frontier." "Yes." Another silence. He let it sit. "Why?" He thought about saying something useful, something that would make sense to a stranger, but what came out was simpler than that. "I needed somewhere no one would look for me." A long pause. Then the door swung open wider. She stood in the frame, 1 twin settled against her left shoulder, the other in the crook of her right arm. She had lowered the knife. Not put it away, but lowered it. In the full light of the afternoon, she was even younger than he'd first thought. 22, maybe less. Her emerald skin was marked with faint ritual lines along her jaw. Clan markings. He recognized them from the war chronicles his father had kept. Her eyes were the color of deep amber. Her clothes were torn, stained with travel and dried blood that was not, he was relieved to see, her own. She was exhausted in a way that went past the body. He recognized that kind too. "I'm Ilara," she said. "Caleb." She looked past him at the empty land. "You have food." 3 weeks of dried provisions. She looked at the twins, then back at him. Something passed through her expression, pride giving way to something harder, something more real. "They need milk. I can nurse them, but I haven't eaten properly in 4 days." He was already on his feet, moving to the saddlebag, 60 miles north in the camp of the Iron Fang clan. Varkas did not sleep. He sat at the edge of his fire, sharpening a blade he had no intention of using for anything practical, and stared at the dark line of the southern horizon. Around him 6 warriors moved quietly, packing, checking horses, pretending they were not watching to see which way his mood would fall. He had received word weeks ago, A contact in the frontier markets had seen a half-blood woman carrying infants heading toward the Harrowfield borderlands. He had waited, sent riders ahead to confirm the location, test the roads, read the shape of the land before committing. He was not a man who moved without knowing the ground beneath his feet. Varka set the blade across his knee. "We ride at dawn," he said. No one argued. The shack came back to life slowly, the way things do when two people who have nothing left to lose decide that something is better than nothing. Caleb knew iron. His father had taught him, not as a trade, but as a discipline, the way some men are taught prayer. He found the tools in the bottom of his pack, a hammer, a pry bar, wire, nails. He started with the collapsed wall. He worked from first light until his hands bled, then wrapped them and kept working. Ilara watched him the first morning from the corner, the twins sleeping in a nest of the cleanest rags she'd been able to salvage. She didn't offer to help. She was still reading him, still measuring the distance between what he said and what he did. He understood that. He didn't push. By the second day, she was beside him. What she lacked in tools, she made up for in strength. She could carry a full log on her shoulder without slowing her stride. She read the land the way hunters do, knew which wood was dry enough to hold weight, which mud would set hard and which would give. Her hands moved with a sureness he hadn't expected, shaping plaster from the clay behind the shack with the flat of a stone. They didn't talk much. They worked. By the end of the first week, the wall held. The roof was patched. There was a door that closed. The twins slept better. Ilara ate. Some of the hollow look around her eyes began to fill in. It was on the 8th day that she told him the first part of it, not sitting down, not in a planned way, but while she was feeding Theron and watching Caleb mend the fence post near the east side of the property. "My mother was Orc," she said. "My father was a man from Crest Hollow, after the Great War." Caleb kept working. He didn't turn around. He'd learned that some things are easier to say to someone's back. 4 years after it ended, she continued, when everyone was supposed to be trying. "Were they?" "They were," she said quietly. "They were the only ones who were." He drove the post into the ground and straightened up, turned to look at her. "And the clan?" Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "The clan called it a defilement. That evening, 12 miles east of the shack, a peddler named Barnaby was making his return circuit through the frontier settlements. He traveled the outer roads twice a month, kettles, thread, dried herbs, news, especially news. News was the most valuable thing he carried, and he knew it. He had passed the old ruined shack on the western rise that afternoon. He had seen a woman on the porch, emerald green, moving with that unmistakable Orc ease, nursing 2 infants in the late sun. He had not slowed his cart, but by the time he reached Harrowfield's eastern gate, he was already composing the sentence in his head. He tried a few versions. The one that stuck was the shortest. "Valerius is hiding a green female of unholy beauty out past the iron markers." He said it at the tavern. It spread before the candles burned low. Ilara spoke in pieces, never all at once. Caleb learned to wait between the pieces, the way you wait between stones crossing a river, steady, without rushing. She told him about her mother's isolation, about being 3 years old and watching her mother grow quieter, smaller, less present, until one morning she simply wasn't there. She told it without tears, which made it worse. She had long since moved past the place where tears lived for that particular grief. She told him about Argus, the old clan chief who had taken her in not out of warmth, but out of principle. He believed that a child did not choose the blood she carried. He protected her with the weight of his authority, which for 20 years had been enough. "He was not kind," she said. "He was just." "That's rarer," Caleb said. She looked at him. Then she nodded. She told him about Varkas in shorter sentences. The way he'd looked at her after Argus died, the particular quality of that look, not desire exactly, but ownership. The difference between the two was something she'd understood immediately and without confusion. "He called the twins his heirs," she said one night, while the lamplight made everything in the room warm and temporary. He never once asked what their names were. Theron and Lumina were sleeping in the corner. Caleb watched their small chests rise and fall. "What are their names?" he said. She told him. He repeated them back, carefully, making sure he had them right. Something in her face shifted then, small and private, a thing she probably didn't know he caught. But he did. He filed it away. In Harrowfield the rumour had grown legs. 3 women at the well had already decided that whatever Valerius was doing out there was an offence to the memory of Maeva. 2 farmers had spoken to each other about the danger of a half-blood on the frontier. And in the delegado's office, Silas Thorne was reading a letter that had come from the northern counties, a formal complaint, unsigned but carrying a clan seal he recognized. He set the letter down. He looked out the window at the quiet street. He didn't do anything yet, but he started paying attention. Caleb had not planned on getting married. He had, in fact, not planned much of anything beyond the shack and the silence. But the morning Barnaby's rumour arrived at his door, carried by 2 of Harrowfield's deacons, stiff and righteous on their horses. The plan clarified itself with sudden and brutal efficiency. They were polite about it. That made it worse. They spoke of community standards, of the dangers of an unregistered half-blood on the frontier, of concern for Caleb's welfare given his recent loss, of what Maeva would have wanted, which was the sentence that made something cold slide into place behind his eyes. He listened without speaking. Then he said, "Thank you for the visit," and closed the door. He stood in the middle of the room. Ilara was at the back wall, grinding grain, Lumina strapped to her chest. She hadn't stopped working, but she'd heard every word. "They'll come back," she said. Not a question. "Yes." She kept grinding, the rhythm of it steady and slow. "There's a law," Caleb said carefully. "Marriage, under the church and the frontier statutes. It makes you a citizen of the settlement. They can't remove a registered spouse." He paused. "It would protect you, legally." The grinding stopped. She turned to look at him. Her expression was difficult to read. Not offended, not grateful, not anything simple. "I'm not asking for more than what it is," he said. "Just the protection. You and the children." A long silence. "And you get what from it?" she asked. He thought about that honestly. "Nothing I haven't already chosen." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the grain. "When?" "Tomorrow." The church at Harrowfield smelled of old candles and older wood. Abbot Morven stood behind the altar with an expression that suggested he had swallowed something unpleasant and was deciding whether to be dignified about it. The gold coin Caleb placed on the altar was sufficient for dignity. There were no guests. There were no flowers. Ilara wore the cleanest thing she owned, a grey travel coat mended at both elbows. Caleb wore the same coat he'd worn to Maeva's grave. Theron and Lumina were strapped to her front and back in cloth carriers she'd fashioned herself. Morvan read the words. They said them back. The twins slept through the whole thing. When it was done, Morvan signed the register with a hand that trembled slightly. Not from age, but from something he would later describe, in private, as a bad feeling about all of it. Outside, in the cold morning air, Caleb and Ilara walked to their horses. "Ilara Valerius," he said quietly, testing the sound of it. She was quiet for a moment. "It's a strange thing," she said, "to have a name that wasn't taken from you." He didn't respond. There was nothing to say to that. He helped her mount, and they rode back toward the frontier in silence. The days that followed the wedding were the quietest of the whole story. They settled into a rhythm, not warmth yet, but something that preceded it, the way the sky changes before dawn. Caleb repaired the fence line that ran east toward the scrubland. Ilara planted a small kitchen garden in the most sheltered corner of the property, working the soil with her hands until she found the dark layer underneath. The twins were growing, already stronger, already louder, already learning the particular trick of demanding attention from two different directions at once. Caleb learned to distinguish their cries. Theron's was higher, more impatient. Lumina's was lower, more deliberate, as if she had already decided that the world would respond to her on her own schedule. He did not tell Ilara that he had noticed this, but she caught him smiling once, watching Lumina refuse to be rushed through feeding, and she said nothing either. Just let the moment be. The nights were harder for him than the days. The days had work in them. Work was the oldest medicine. But the nights brought the shack's specific silence. Not the empty silence he'd come here to find, but a filled one. 2 sleeping babies and a woman's breathing, and the fire settling into coals. It was a silence that resembled something he had lost. And resemblance, he was learning, was its own kind of knife. He did not speak of Maeva to Ilara. She did not ask. One evening she left a bowl of something on the table beside his bedroll, a grain broth with dried herbs and a small piece of smoked meat. She didn't say it was for him. She just left it there. He ate it in the dark and said nothing about it in the morning, but he was up before her the next day, water already heated, her cup waiting. That was how it went. In Harrowfield, the mood had not improved. 3 men had come to Silas Thorne's office in the week since the wedding. Each one had a complaint. The phrasing was different, but the architecture was the same. Valerius had brought something dangerous into the borderlands, a half-blood, clan blood. What happened when the clan came looking? Thorne listened each time. He wrote nothing down. He said, "The marriage is legal." The men left unsatisfied. They went back to the tavern and talked to each other in the way people do when they can feel something coming, but can't agree on what shape it will take. 20 miles north, the shape was getting closer. Gideon heard them first. He was splitting timber in the stand of pines along the northern track when the ground told him something was wrong. Not sound yet, just vibration, the low drum of heavy horses moving in a line. He counted it in his chest before he heard it in his ears. 7, maybe more. He dropped the axe and ran for his own horse. He was not a fast thinker, but he was a fast rider, and he knew the land between the pine stand and Harrowfield well enough to ride it without the road. He covered the distance in 12 minutes, came through the north gate at a gallop, and was already shouting before he hit the square. 7 orcs, armed, coming down the frontier track. The square responded the way frontier squares do, not panic, but a swift, practiced urgency. Men came out of doorways. Rifles appeared. Silas Thorne stepped out of his office with his coat already buttoned and his expression already settled. "How far back?" he asked Gideon. 10 minutes, maybe less." Thorne looked at the men assembling around him. He counted 16 with rifles. He thought about the math. He thought about the Great War, not in terms of glory, which was how young men remembered it, but in terms of cost, which was how old men did. "We ride to the Valerius property," he said. "We do not fire unless fired upon." They moved out at a trot. At the shack, Caleb had heard the horses before he'd seen them. He came to the porch slowly, without the rifle. He'd made that decision inside, before the door opened, consciously, deliberately. He had lived his whole life in a settlement that settled things with the threat of metal, and he had watched what that produced, and he had decided, standing in the middle of his rebuilt shack with his wife nursing his children behind him, that he was done with it. He stood on the porch with his hands at his sides. Behind him, inside the house, Ilara had heard the horses too. She had reached instinctively for the bronze knife she kept on the shelf beside the door, the same one she had held in the dark ruin the night everything changed. Her hand closed around the handle. She held it for a moment. Then she set it back down. She picked up Theron instead, then Lumina, and waited. There were 7 of them. They came to a stop 20 yards out, in a loose formation that communicated military training without making it theatrical. The one at the front was the largest, not just in size, but in presence, the kind of mass that assumes the space around it has no other purpose. Tusks curved upward from a jaw set in permanent contempt, dark armor, travel-worn but functional, Varkas. Valerius. The word came out like something being cut. Varkas, Caleb said. You know my name. Ilara mentioned you. Something moved behind Varkas's eyes. Not anger yet, something that preceded anger, the way pressure precedes a break. Send her out, he said, and the children. There is no business between you and me if you do that now. Caleb said nothing. I will burn this place, Varkas said. I will burn it and take what is mine from the ashes. This is your one chance to walk away. Caleb stayed where he was. He could hear the twins inside. He could hear Ilara moving. He was afraid. There was no virtue in pretending otherwise. 7 armed orcs, a man alone on a porch with no weapon. Fear was the correct response. But beneath the fear was something steadier, something he had not felt in a long time. He recognized it dimly from before the grief had moved in and taken up all the room. He was not going anywhere. You're not taking them, he said. The sound of horses, many horses, rose from the south. Silas Thorne led his men around the east side of the property and completed the circle before Varkas had time to reposition. 16 rifles. 16 men who knew this land the way they knew their own skin. They did not shout or threaten. They simply arrived and stayed. The geometry of it was unmistakable. The orcs were surrounded. For a moment nothing moved except the wind. Varkas looked at the rifles. He looked at Thorne. He looked back at Caleb, still standing on the porch with empty hands. 16 against 7, one of Varkas's scouts said quietly. Not a challenge, just arithmetic. Varkas said nothing. The door behind Caleb opened. Ilara stepped out. She came to stand beside him, not behind him, beside him. Theron was in her left arm, Lumina in her right. She looked at Varkas with a steadiness that had nothing performative in it. She had been afraid for 2 months. She was done with it. Varkas, she said. He looked at her, at the children, at her face. They are not your heirs, she said. They are not your property. They are not your legacy. A pause. They have a name. They have a home. They have a father who stood on this porch without a weapon because he knew you would understand what that meant. Something shifted in the formation behind Varkas. One of his riders had lowered his spear slightly, almost imperceptibly, then another. This is not what Argus taught, one of them said quietly. Varkas turned on the speaker, but the damage was done. He could feel it. The way a current changes in a room, the way weight redistributes when something that was holding is released. Caleb stepped off the porch. He walked to the middle of the space between the 2 groups, equidistant, and turned to face Varkas directly. The war ended 26 years ago, he said. His voice was calm, not defiant, calm, which is harder. Every man here, human or orc, buried someone in that war. Every one of us knows what it cost. He let that sit for a moment. No one here wants to go back to that. Not your men, not mine. Varkas's jaw worked. There are no winners in what you're trying to start today, Caleb said. Only more graves. The silence was complete. Thorne and his men held their positions. The orc warriors held theirs. No one pulled a trigger. No one raised a spear. The whole weight of the moment balanced on a point so fine it was almost invisible. Then Varkas pulled his horse's head around. He did not speak again. He gave no signal, no order, no acknowledgement. He simply turned, and after a moment, his men turned with him. They rode north without looking back. The sound of their horses faded slowly. absorbed by the wind and the open land, until there was nothing left of them but the trail they'd pressed into the grass. Caleb stood in the open ground and watched them go. Behind him, he heard Ilara exhale, a long, controlled breath that held everything she had been carrying since she'd walked into that shack. Thorn rode forward and stopped his horse a few yards away. He looked at Caleb for a moment, then at Ilara, then back at Caleb. He nodded once, a small thing, but it was real. One by one, his men lowered their rifles. The seasons moved through the property on the Iron Frontier, the way they move through places that have survived something with a particular quality, as if the land itself has earned the right to change slowly. The shack became a house. Caleb added a second room the spring after the confrontation, and a proper roof by summer, and a covered porch the following year, where Ilara kept her herbs in clay pots arranged by use. The kitchen garden spread outward in rings. A goat arrived, then two. The fence line that had been rotted posts and old wire became solid timber, corner to corner. Ilara became the settlement's healer before anyone had officially decided on it. It happened quietly, the way real things happen: a farmer's wife with a fever, a child with a bone set wrong, an old man whose lungs the winter had gotten into. Ilara used what Argus had taught her: root knowledge, breath knowledge, the patience to sit with something until it told you what it needed. Word passed. People came. At first they came reluctantly, with that particular stiffness of people doing something they haven't yet decided is acceptable. Then they came without the stiffness. She treated them the same either way. Theron and Lumina started at the village school under the name Valerius in their 4th year. Their first day, 2 children refused to sit near them. By the end of the week, one of those children had shown Theron how to draw a horse, and Lumina had already organized the others into a game with rules only she fully understood. Children, it turned out, were faster at the work than adults. Soren was born in the spring of the 3rd year, small and furious and perfect, with Caleb's jaw and Ilara's eyes and the particular quality of stubbornness that seemed to have come from both directions at once. The day Soren came into the world, Caleb sat outside the door of the house, their house fully and permanently theirs, and listened to his son cry for the first time, and felt something in him that had been clenched for years finally, slowly open. He did not cry. He just sat there with his hands loose in his lap and let it happen. Inside, Ilara lay back against the pillow and held Soren against her chest and listened to him settle. Through the window, she could see the slope of the property, the fence line Caleb had built, the garden, the clay pots on the porch. The sky above the Iron Frontier was the color of warm copper. She thought about her mother. She thought about the road she had walked to get here, the exhaustion, the fear, the knife in her hand in a dark ruin at the edge of the world. She thought about the sound of crying that had broken the silence, and the man in the doorway who had lowered his rifle. She thought about how strange and precise the world was sometimes, how it handed you the exact thing you hadn't known you needed. She held her son closer. Years settled over the property like good weather after a long storm. The house became a trading post, not by design, but because it sat at the right place on the frontier road, and because people found that the woman inside knew herbs, and the man inside knew iron, and that both of them would deal with you honestly regardless of what you were carrying. Orcs came, cautious at first, then regularly. Humans came. The occasional traveler who fit into neither category came and was welcomed anyway. Caleb watched it happen from the fence line or the porch or the forge he'd built on the north side of the property, and he said very little about it because there was very little that needed saying. In the evenings, Theron and Lumina and Soren ran in the pasture behind the house while the light held. They ran without purpose, the way children do, for the pure fact of movement, for the grass under their feet, for the sound of each other laughing. Caleb watched them from the fence. Ilara came to stand beside him, and they watched together. and the silence between them was nothing like the silence he had come here to find. It was the opposite of that. It was full. She took his hand. He held it. The sun moved toward the horizon over the canyon country, painting the sky in long bands of amber and rust. Somewhere in the distance, faint and low, came the sound of the steam engine on the northern trade road, the Iron Maria, carrying goods and people, and the slow forward press of a world trying to become something better than it had been. Not soldiers, not war drums. Progress. Caleb looked at the horizon, then at the children, then at the woman beside him. The shack that was supposed to be a tomb had become something else entirely, something he hadn't had a word for when he rode away from Maver's grave with empty hands and a chest full of silence. He had a word for it now, several words actually, but the truest one was simple: home, and the years that followed proved it again and again. In the end, the scars on the skin matter far less than the bridges we build. May the differences one day fall away completely, 100% without remainder, and may the world understand that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the active presence of love and justice. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot, and drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orcbound Legacy.